am Necrozek, your necromancer with all the answers, and welcome to the first episode of What's in the Box, an interview with different people in our amazing commander community to just highlight them, what they do, and things you might not know. Today, for our first episode, I have an amazing guest, a very tall drink of water, if you will.
Oh
Um,
boy.
one of my favorite spikes for sure, and an honorary member of the CAG, Jim. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Zach?
Uh, so much better now that you're here, if I'm being honest. I'm just gonna butter you up. So if you end up having
Oh.
cholesterol spikes after this, I'm sorry. That's just how I am. So like I mentioned, I've been a big fan of the Spike Beaters for a while. Surprisingly, I actually went back and found the episode where I found you guys originally. It was season 3, episode 3. I was building my
Okay.
own Momir Vig deck, and it just so happens one of the
I
Spike Beaters
love.
I'm talking to right
Oh,
now. Um, yeah, it was the first episode I ever watched. I was like trying to figure out how to build Momer Vig in a way that was fun, but also kind of interesting. And someone was playing hackball, and
that was me.
ever since then, I was subscribed, and that bell has been rang. Um,
Yeah,
such cool content. But for people who might not know, like, do you want to talk a little bit about you and like what you guys do in the community?
sure. Yeah. I mean, first of all, Momir Vig is sick. It's one of my favorite like EDH decks of all time. I think it's so creative and so weird. And it's like,
Exactly.
despite the, and this kind of ties into our what we do or what our like MO is as creators, is that Momir Vig is a distinctively Commander thing. It's something that only exists in Commander, right? Like you
Hmm.
can't play it in other formats, really,
No.
not with any kind of reliability. But it's also a very powerful deck. And so, one of the things that we really wanted to do as content creators was show people that there are distinctively Commander experiences to be had at every level along the power level spectrum, right?
Right.
So you can play Commander and have Commander experiences playing precons, playing draft chaff, playing Vorthos decks, playing whatever, but also decks with extremely high power levels. So we're not so much, a lot of people would categorize us as a CEDH channel.
Hmm.
Not necessarily the case. It's more like we play whatever we like playing, and sometimes that happens to be CEDH.
So that's one of my absolute favorite things about the spike feeders. I'm along the lines of belief that we're all one community, right? It's not CEDH and EDH are different things. No, we are one community. It just so happens some lines of play are a little bit quicker than others. That's what Rule Zero is for. That's about the conversation of talking to each other. But that's one of my absolute favorite things about the spike feeders is that you guys do a very good job of really kind of taking that whole like boogeyman of the like format persona and just kind of smashing it. You guys are super fun to like watch. You guys have really fun interactions. A lot of like how I learned to pilot decks and how certain things resolve and how they work is because I've watched channels like the Spike Feeders and Casually Competitive, Playing with Power. Like I think CEDH gets a bad rap. And when you got guys like you and the other channels I mentioned kind of championing it, there's no reason why it should ever be anything but fun. It's just,
Yeah.
we're all playing the same game.
Exactly. And like we wouldn't, so this is one of the things that a lot of people got to keep in mind, right? Is that we wouldn't play CDH if we didn't have fun playing it, right?
Hmm.
Like there's no the EV on playing CDH is horrendously bad, right? Like
Right.
if you want to build a $9,000 deck to grind tickets at a GP or to grind like F&M promos or whatever, right? Like the EV is not good,
No.
right? You could invest that money in literally anything else and end up with a better return on your, magic, even your time.
Oh,
Because it takes a ton of
100%.
time to like learn it and to play these games. So like we wouldn't do it if there wasn't something else behind it other than just winning things, right? Like nobody's making the pro tour.
Right.
Um, so we try to keep that in mind and just say like, the social element doesn't go away when you play certain cards unless you play them in a way that's antisocial or asocial.
Yeah.
So
That's what's
yeah,
great about you guys is like I love especially the older seasons with COVID, you guys going to webcam, like we all can relate to that. But one of my favorite things, like especially like talking about season 3 and going like further back, is being able to be at like Casa del Spike Feeders and watching you guys at the table and just playing, and then over time watching the your guys' setup and your room where you guys play just evolve and get better. It was always really cool. Like I said, I've been following for quite a while now, and just seeing that casual progression kind of resonates to, I think, what being a commander player is anymore. It's like you guys have been your play group, your meta for a long time, and I think your most recent episode, you guys were talking about it, where what was which I think we were talking about Bill's Najila deck. You guys did a ban on a specific card. I forget what it was. Was it Flash?
We kind of did. We not so much. Like so, Flash, although it was a problem, like a fairly big problem in the entire like CEDH community, it really wasn't a problem in our meta, right?
Hmm.
Bill was the only one that really played Flash in any capacity in our
And it was
group,
with
and he
Najila,
played it against
correct?
Najila deck. Yeah, he played Najila Flash Hulk. It was like a sneak attack list that finished the game with Kiki Jiki and like Revelar combos.
Sure.
So it wasn't really the typical like Cephalid Breakfast Flash Hulk deck that you'd normally see. Um, it's kind of what the CDH community refers to as like an adaptive layered combo list,
Right.
where it's kind of got multiple combos that overlap and interlock, so that some of the pieces are redundancies for other combos and that kind of thing. Very different from the sort of all-in, speed is the focus
Sure.
Flash Hulk
Sure.
deck that you might have seen. There really wasn't a problem in our meta, but then Flash did get banned, which I think was a good move for the CEDH community in general,
Right.
and by extension the EDH community as well. Um, but with Flash being banned, that was Bill's favorite deck, so it kind of he's been kind of looking for another favorite deck, but hasn't really found one.
Uh, but my point to the whole thing is that I just love that, like, how you guys interact as a group reflects how I feel about my meta and how my play group has progressed. I think that's what's really unique about the Spike Feeders channel in general, is that you guys just aren't making content to make content. You're making content because you enjoy it and it's very visible. And that's one thing that, like, makes it super, like, man, I want to talk to Jim, man, I want to talk to Bill, is because you guys are you're just like me. You know what I mean? Like, it's fun just to watch you guys play, and I can see the excitement and all the silly interactions. And I think that's what's so appealing about the Spike Beaters channel. Um, well, since we're already on the topic of the channel, I kind of want to go over a couple shows. So I've probably listened to the playlist of Spike on the Mic probably 6 or 7 times now. I absolutely love that series. Do you kind of want to talk about that and explain what Spike on the Mic is for the audience?
Yeah, I mean, I can even maybe give you a little bit of a sneak peek on where it's going because it's going
Oh,
to be changing up a little bit soon.
please do.
Um,
I'm telling you, I've went through
yeah,
that playlist a couple times.
so we have a couple different series, and they're kind of intended to do different things.
Hmm.
Our gameplay series is intended to showcase like our gameplay style, our personalities, that kind of thing. We've got our Better Know a Combo series, which focuses on combos. They're really compact episodes. They're not the typical 10 to 12 minute YouTube videos. 10 to 12 minute is a significant
Right.
thing in terms of monetization and that kind of thing for creators.
I have to interrupt you. I have my little notepad in front of me so I didn't forget
Oh
anything.
yeah.
Better Know a Combo is on here. I love that series. There are some channels that do it, but you guys definitely do a very good job at, like, going in and explaining it. I think that's one of the first things I ever saw on your YouTube channel was a Better Know a Combo. And, like, it's so cool where not only do you explain the combo, but you also explain when you can actually interrupt
Mhm.
the combo to stop it from happening, which amazing. Most channels don't do that. And I think that's another, one of the charms of the spike feeders is that you
Yeah.
guys actually explain it inwards and outwards.
Yeah, we actually originally our like concept for Better Know a Combo was called a dual deck tech, which was the idea of how do you play something and how do you play against it. And that kind of evolved into the Better Know a Combo series. But the intent there is we want to make it as short and concise as possible, like
Hmm.
narrow it down to exactly the pieces of the combo, talk about how it works, any rules, interactions, all that kind of stuff. But they're as short as possible because I want somebody to be able to pull up that video if they're playing in a game and they don't know
Right.
how to execute a combo. I want them to be able to pull it up and say, here's what I'm going to do. These are the steps that I'm going to take.
Exactly.
Almost like when you would pull up if you're cooking or whatever and you need to pull up a recipe, right? You don't want all of the life story of the person who's making the meal. You want the recipe, right? That's
Yeah.
why you're reading it. So that was kind of the intent behind Better Know a Combo. But after we did a few of those, we had some people start to ask, what about this or what about that? And I kind of realized that we didn't really have a video series that was intended for deeper dives into things.
Mhm.
Things that needed a little bit more context and a little bit more explanation. So that's where Spike on the Mic came from. And I just started out with saying, you know what, let's tackle a topic that people might not know everything about and try and teach them everything about it, right? So I
Right.
started out with a series or with an episode called Fetchlands, where we said, this is why Fetchlands are good. And that's what the whole episode is about is, why would you want to play them? Why would you play them instead of something else? How do they work? What makes them good? Um, and then are they worth, whatever the price tag is for Fetchlands right now? So that was
Mhm.
kind of where Spike on the Mic started. And then after about maybe half a dozen episodes, I ended up on the Commander Advisory Group,
Mhm. And
and I figured that
congratulations, by the way.
oh, thank you.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And then I figured, this would be a really good vehicle for me to talk about the kind of more hot button
Mhm.
topics in the Commander community, where we talk about things like, color identity or hybrid mana or like planeswalkers as commanders, all of these different things that people tend to argue about online. Let's give them all of the context surrounding those topics. And then I'm also able to use it to inject my personal opinion to say, here's everything about it. This is what I think. So that's where the last couple episodes of Spike on the Mic have come from.
That's definitely been one thing that I enjoyed. There were 3 episodes that really kind of resonated with me. One of the first you were talking about, poison or
Mhm,
infect, should it be changed? And you went into explaining how exactly it functions and why it functions certain ways in certain formats and why in Commander you felt that it didn't need to be changed. And,
mhm,
because it's so many more hoops to jump through, we do have the political aspect of the format. There are 3 other people we're dealing with. So if we're dealing with one
mhm,
person, it's regulated much better. And you
mhm,
also talked about the card pool, which is interesting because a lot of people don't think about that, which makes sense because with being on the CAG, you have the what did you refer to it as? It's what the rules committee uses to base their judgments off of whether something should be banned or not. I can't remember
oh, the
the
philosophy document.
Thank you. Yes, the
Yeah.
philosophy document. I thought that was really cool because we don't get to see that a lot. We
Mhm,
know we see how the rules community acts, and we just kind of see the end result. We do get explanations, but it doesn't always make as much sense. So to have something like Spike on the Mic, where you have a unique perspective, being entrenched in the more competitive format, but also having the more casual experience and having the
mhm.
platform that you do, it's made me look at things a lot differently. So
That
see,
makes me really happy to hear.
yeah, like I love that one. I also really liked what was the other one? I had it written down and I accidentally forgot it. But the other thing that I also really liked was when you were talking about the IPs.
Mhm,
I was very excited about The Walking Dead personally. I championed I championed those cards because I like the show. So like as soon as
yeah.
Negan was spoiled, I had a Negan deck built that night. I was so
Mhm,
excited. But to hear your philosophies behind it and to, get an outside perspective, like, okay, this is cool. So Spike on the Mic was like I said, I've listened to that playlist so many times because it's a unique perspective that we don't usually get to see. And I think it's a very like a boon to the community because if someone knows
mhm.
who you are, knows the spike feeders, it's something they can find and then maybe change their opinion or have a better understanding of how things are going forward or how they can perceive things.
Yeah, like, I wanted it to exist as a record out there so that, first of all, I could, like, dispel some misconceptions because there's a lot of misconceptions when people argue about the format.
Yeah.
Even just when it comes to, like, why is a particular card banned, you
Hmm.
know? Like when I first started making Magic content, I was like, well, why isn't Time Twister banned, but the rest of the Power Nine is, right? And Toby Elliott swooped in and he was like, well, Time Twister isn't banned because it is not a marquee card in Vintage. And if somebody sat down and watched you playing a Time Twister, they wouldn't assume you were playing Vintage. But if you played a Mox Ruby, they would be like, oh, these people are playing Vintage, and they would probably just leave, or if they weren't interested, or they wouldn't think that it was a format that they could reasonably get into because they already
Yeah.
have all these preconceived notions about Vintage. So stuff like that, where like that's not something that a lot of people know. But I wanted to get that stuff out there to say, like, this is the real reason behind this stuff. Like, I've gone and I've researched it. I've talked to the people that made the decisions. This is what's out there, and then taking it one step further to say, this is what I think, or when I'm in these discussions with the people who are making the decisions, these are the types of arguments that I'm going to make. And especially I wanted to do it in a way that I didn't have to repeat myself over and over and over again. I could do it once and then send somebody the link to the video if they have questions, you know?
I do like that you do that as well, where when you're explaining something, you explain it like this is my opinion because it is your opinion. You know, like this is how you feel about a situation, and if you were to go to the rules committee, this is how you would argue the situation for or against and why. I like that because a lot of people we just don't know. You know, like we're just
Mhm,
playing commander. I'm just a normal guy. If they say tomorrow that Protean Hawk is banned again, I'm gonna be bummed. Am I using it for a combo? No. I just play out of the graveyard a lot. Makes sense to me.
yeah.
But
Yep.
I can understand, and it's easier to follow through when you have people like yourself that, hey, this is why it's banned. This is why this is an issue. It makes for less feel bads, I think. And it also helps too because I haven't realized until I started making content myself that the casual community and what I would consider the maybe semi-competitive community and upwards are two completely different things because they're not as focused on content for the
Mm,
most part. I didn't
mhm,
realize like I have a couple friends that they started listening to the podcast and watching our deck techs and they just don't know some of the people or some of the things that we're talking about. Like
mhm.
it's good to have that content out there to be able to explain it to people who might just not be as in touch or familiar with the situation.
Yeah, there's a huge, huge group of people that don't engage with the online like discourse or the content surrounding things. Like if you're on Twitter fairly frequently, there's like trends of people talk about things, different things on different days, right? Um, People that like maybe just go to FNM or something like that aren't necessarily that plugged in.
Hmm.
Like there's people in my I have a play group that's not the Spike Feeders here in Winnipeg. We just play like dumb games or whatever. It's not always Magic, but they're much more casual and like they don't know or care that I'm on the Commander Advisory Group. They don't know or care what the Commander Advisory Group is, right? They
Right.
just want to play Commander. It's just another game that they play, you know. Um, but yeah, there's a huge, and it's definitely a very useful thing to keep in mind that, you know, when you make decisions, it's not just the people that are talking on Twitter about it that are affected. There's like a
Yeah.
massive pool of people that are actually really hard to reach, you
Yeah.
know?
Um,
Um, yeah.
yeah, it's a very unique social kind of thing that I never realized until I really got into following content creators, like just being immersed in the content. And then it was like I would see something like, "Oh, this is crazy that this product's coming out and it's upset these people." And I would talk
Mhm.
to my friends that aren't as that aren't as dialed in, and they're like, "Well, why does that matter? Like, what is?"
Who cares,
Yeah.
right? This is the one thing that came up a lot with The Walking Dead was The Walking Dead is the type of product that is actually quite a bit more popular among people that aren't plugged into the online discourse as it is with people that are, right? If you went
Yeah.
online, if you went on Reddit, there was like 99% of the people on Reddit hated The Walking Dead stuff. If you go to an average, you know, LGS, um, like the people that are playing at the table in the corner, if they're not the type of people that are on Twitter every day talking about magic, they're like, oh, that's cool. I'm either into The Walking Dead or I'm not, you know, right? But
Yeah.
the fact that it exists doesn't really matter to them, you
It
know?
was a similar situation for me. Growing up, I've played Magic for quite a while, and my family would every now and again, birthday, Christmases, whatever, they would buy me stuff. So The Walking Dead, when the pre order came out for The Walking Dead, it was right around my birthday. My
Oh,
grandparents were like, "Hey, we bought this for your birthday. When do you get it?" And they got me the secret, the Walking Dead Secret Lair because I'm
that's
such a big
cool.
fan. And I was like,
Yeah.
"Well, I have to build all these commanders now because it's not so much that I
Yeah.
just like the show, but it's like." My family did this for me, like
Yeah, that's really cool.
and I thought that was neat that Magic has, like, gone to this place now where it's like, we recognize it because we do it every day, but when my family's like, "Oh, hey, I know he likes The Walking Dead, but he's also into Magic, like,
Hmm.
I'm gonna get this for him."
Yeah.
Like, that's very cool, it's very unique, no other game can really say that.
Yeah, and like I have some opinions on whether it's good for the health of the game or not.
Yeah,
I'm not
sure.
I'm not thrilled with it, but you have to definitely acknowledge that there's people out there that like The Walking Dead that are quite excited about this, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Like I and my personal opinion in that situation doesn't necessarily um, you know, it doesn't override that. It like you just have to acknowledge the fact that there are people out there that like it. There's people out there that don't. And you just kind of have to leave it at that. It's like, you know, it's not going to break the game. Commander's a juggernaut at this point, to the point where very few things could scuttle this game, you know?
Yeah, it's this year has if we could make it through this year, I can like we really can't be stopped at this point. Like spell
Yeah,
table, like webcam games, multiple different fiascos, quote unquote, with products and honestly, I think Commander's in the healthiest spot it's been in such a
yeah,
long time.
I would
Um,
agree.
so since we've kind of already been talking about it, do you want to speak a little bit more about the CAG and what it is for our friends that might not know, and like what you feel like your
Yeah.
role is exactly on the CAG?
Yeah, to explain the CAG, you kind of have to explain the rules committee. The rules
Sure.
committee is a group of four people. It's Scott Larrabee, Toby Elliott, Gavin Duggan, and Sheldon Menery, and they are the four people who have the sole authority to make official changes to Commander. That's banning cards, unbanning cards, making rules changes, determining format legality for the purposes of new sets and that kind of thing. Um, they're the people that make those decisions. Prior to a couple of years ago, it was just the four of them, and they would go out in the community, get ideas from people that they played against, that kind of stuff, and then they would make decisions based on that. They would have, maybe confidants in the community that they would talk to and say, can you give me a little bit more info on this, or what are you seeing at your LGS, that kind of stuff. They decided to sort of formalize that role of advisor by adding six people to a newly formed commander advisory group. I'm not going to name them off the top of my head, but it's people in the community that you would mostly recognize. It's like Josh Lee
Right.
Kwai, Rachel Agnes plays a lot of vintage. She works for WotC now. There's Adam Staborski, and then after the initial commander advisory group was formed, I guess it wasn't six, it might have been five at the start. Then they added Olivia Gobert Hicks, a
Hmm.
cosplayer and Twitch streamer. Um, and then after that, they added another four. And I was one of the four that got added. So now there's 10 of them total, or 10 of us total. And we kind of, on an ongoing basis in a secret Discord server, we talk about, I'm not going to call it a secret Discord server. That sounds very like clandestine
Yeah, it
and
was like
whatever.
very,
But
very Illuminati.
yeah, but basically, we have these ongoing discussions with the rules committee where they do that kind of thing. They'll bounce ideas off of us. They'll say
Mhm.
like, "Hey, what would happen if we did this?" Or, what do you think about these particular cards? Especially when new cards get released, we'll talk about whether things need to be banned or unbanned, or what's healthy for the format. Um, and then we have a quarterly meeting where we kind of officially make these determinations. The CAG's role is not necessarily to come to consensus
Mhm.
because you'll never like it's such a diverse group of people.
Yeah.
um, you're never going to reach consensus on any of these issues. You get 10 Magic players in a room, they'll never agree on
Oh
anything,
man,
right?
we already have a hard enough time doing that as four people on a podcast.
Right. So it's not up to us to say like this is the CAG's official recommendation to the rules committee. Each individual will put in their recommendation, and sometimes we agree and sometimes we don't. And then the rules committee takes that stuff away, and then they make their decisions based on that information. So the CAG doesn't have a vote, but we can say, I feel strongly about this, or this is what I'm seeing in the community, that kind of thing.
Right.
It's
Well,
mostly to bust up the echo chambers of, make sure that there's a wider net of information
and
funneled into
that's
them.
what I was going to say. When the CAG was introduced, I was actually very excited because with the rules committee, it felt in my opinion that it was like it's for guys that they have their meta and they do their best to experience as much as they can, but it's for people. Like
Hmm.
that's a lot for a format that has I don't want to say
Millions.
grown.
It'll
It's like
be
it's
6 millions. Yeah.
exploded. Yeah. So the CAG was super exciting when it was talked about, and to have so many people of so many unique different perspectives and backgrounds and just even types of play. That's the big thing is
Hmm.
we like amongst all of you guys, it's all very wide ranges of play, and it's honestly something that's super healthy for the format. I'm super glad that someone like you was actually on it because like for the longest time, like I don't play CEDH, but I love consuming the content.
Hmm.
I I love the interaction. I love seeing things that I wouldn't know how to do resolve. Like I
Hmm.
learn a lot from watching these channels. So to have what people felt like didn't have a voice now have a voice, amazing. Like that was
Yeah, and I mean,
such a good thing.
there's some people on the CAG, like Rachel Agnes does play CDH.
Hmm.
Josh Lee Kwai from the Command Zone has a CDH deck, so even though he doesn't like regularly play
Yeah.
CEDH, and I wouldn't consider him to be a part of the CEDH community, I don't think
Hmm.
he's trolling the competitive CEDH subreddit or the
Right.
Discord or whatever.
Like they have taking turns, uh, but in my mind,
Yeah.
it's not as synonymous as something like spike feeders, where
Mhm.
once again, I'm not going to put labels on your content because that is your content. But from my perspective, I've always thought of it as more of a competitive um,
Mhm.
channel,
Yeah,
which
we
is
definitely skew higher power for
yeah,
sure.
which is
That's like undeniable.
it's exciting. Like I love seeing
Yeah.
that.
And so, my role on the CAG is not necessarily as a representative of the CEDH community.
Sure.
It's more that like I've got thoughts on the entire format, which you can see from Spike on the Mic, right?
Yeah,
Like
definitely.
the infect stuff doesn't overlap with CEDH at all. Like the
No.
Venn diagram is two separate circles.
Yes.
And so, when Sheldon and I were talking about this, we originally I got in touch with Sheldon to talk about Flash, about the social implications and all that stuff.
I remember like seeing your tweets. They were very, very well done. I thought they were so well spoken, and I was like, man, they need to offer this guy a position because you did such a good job. Like that was, I remember the whole debacle of Thassa's Oracle and
Mhm.
Flash, and just how things were, like casual games were suddenly becoming destroyed by by one card, and then that was also bleeding into competitive as well. There was a
Yeah.
lot of um, decks that were just end up being that, it became
Mhm.
tier 0 and that became a problem. So to see you speak to it on just for people, not even because
Mhm.
you wanted attention or anything like that. It was just like, "Hey guys, I need you to see this."
Yeah.
Honestly, kudos. That was awesome.
So we like I got in touch with Sheldon. We talked about Flash, and then you know before Flash was banned, like we were part of a Discord server with a bunch of people from the CDH community, and
Mhm.
I left that Discord server fairly well before Flash was banned, actually. And I said to them, I'm mostly done talking about this. I've told you everything that I need to tell you about Flash. But just so you know, like I'm not going away. Like I have thoughts on other things, Commander too, right? Like this is
Right.
not. I'm not a one issue kind of guy, and that kind of sparked the discussion about CAG stuff. So yeah, that was kind of the point where Sheldon and I were talking about other things. Like something would come up, and Sheldon might DM me on Discord or whatever and say like, assume that I want your opinion about this stuff, because
Nice.
the CAG role is not necessarily just to funnel information from the community. It's also to provide a layer of analysis on top of it to say like, this is what people are talking about, and then what do you think about it, right?
Right.
Um, it's summarization and analysis, and not just summarization.
Exactly. I can definitely see that, and you definitely remind you strike me as a person that's good at that kind of stuff. Like even from just watching how you play, like on spike feeders, like you're very good at just kind of, all right, what's going on, and how am I best going to handle this situation? So
Mhm.
that's awesome. So I've kind of gotten the backstory on the spike feeders and the CAG, but I kind of want to talk more about your backstory, your origin story. Tell
Mhm.
me how you got into Magic, and just anything you want to about it, really.
Yeah. So I've been playing Magic since somewhere between revised and fourth edition. So like in the 94, 95 era. So I
Okay.
was about like 9 when I started playing Magic. I played until the late 90s. It was like right around Exodus that I stopped playing. And I took a break. Then what happened was Bill from the Spike Feeders is my brother. He's my little brother. He's 8 years younger than me, and he started playing Yu-Gi-Oh. And then through Yu-Gi-Oh, he ended up meeting Elliot from our group, and Jerry was Elliot's roommate at the time. And so they were playing Yu-Gi-Oh, and then they kind of got into Magic. And so I pulled out my old cards and that kind of thing, and I started playing Magic with Bill. We were just playing like 60 card kitchen table
Sure.
legacy. It wasn't
the
really legacy, but
the best way to
um,
play, honestly, outside of Commander.
yeah, yeah, just like casual 60 card constructed. Uh, and at one point, all of his cards were new. This was like right around original Innistrad, right around there, maybe
Ah,
like Scars of Mirrodin.
I love that was
Um,
such a good time.
Yeah, it really was. It really was. So Bill played werewolves. I was playing vampires. Supplemented with a lot of my cards from my collection from the early '90s, and so it was very much like Dark Ritual into Vampire Nighthawk kind of. Um,
Ah, I love
yeah,
that. Vampire
yeah, it was
Nighthawk.
good.
Vampire Nighthawk is still one of my favorite cards ever printed.
Yeah, and then we kind of hit a wall. Where Bill started going to our LGS and he was buying new cards and that kind of thing, and he started playing Modern. So he was playing werewolves in Modern, and we were doing whatever. I wanted to go to a modern night with him and realized that my deck wasn't modern legal. And I had a second deck at this time. It was using Master Transmuter to bounce like Shield Sphere and Ornithopter into Blightsteel Colossus. It was like it's so goofy, but very fun. But you couldn't play Shield Sphere in modern, it wasn't legal. So I, kind of backed off on Magic a little bit. And then him and his friends, Bill and his friends, started getting into Commander. And he came to me and said, hey, there's this new format. You can play whatever cards you want. They're all legal. And that was when I started building Commander decks. So I built a Voral of the Hulklade Commander deck with like
Nice.
+1/+1 counters, and just like went to town. And it was super, super fun. It was like a modular, like I used all the modular Arcbound creatures along with like affinity for artifact stuff, and just played a whole bunch of free artifacts and moved +1/+1 counters around. And that was how I got into EDH.
Very cool. I love modular. I wish so badly we
Yeah.
could see. I wish we could see so much more modular and devour. I want those
Hmm.
mechanics back so
Oh,
badly.
yeah.
I'm working on this weird Belby list that centers around devour.
Belby's sweet.
Yeah,
Like, actually.
yeah, Belby's insane. I was just telling him I'm working. So we do a lore show, and it sparked me to want to build what I call my Phyrexian box. So it's an archive of 4 Phyrexian commander decks. I finished the first 3, and Belby's my last one. I was like, I don't want to play with
Nice.
Eldrazi. How do I avoid that? I'm gonna do something silly.
Yeah. Belby's sweet, though.
Yeah,
Like, actually really sweet.
there's so many silly things you can do. But so your origin story is very sweet. It's really cool. I didn't know that you guys were as connected as you are in the Spike Beater, so that makes me super happy. I feel like I got like a little bit behind the scenes that I wasn't expecting, so that's really cool.
Yeah.
But
Like,
my
beyond that, like, if you extend it to the other people, like, Jan was a judge at the store that we used to play at. That's how we met him. And then Maddie worked at the store that we played at. And who else does that leave? That leaves Alex. Alex was also a judge. Alex is a more recent Spike Feeder
hmm
addition.
I was
And am
just
I missing
listening to
anyone?
Alex's episode on Spike on the Mic. Um,
Yeah.
oh, what was it called? Dang it, I'm gonna
It's
blank because
called like solutions to format problems or whatever. It's I'm not sure what we actually called it, but the idea is that like there's different things that you can do to solve problems at different levels
I've
in the
literally like
format.
with how my work has been lately, I've been able to listen to like whatever I want. So I literally put your guys' playlist on shuffle or not shuffle,
Yeah.
but repeat and just listen. But that's awesome. Before I go into the next section, I do want to plug your guys' website. If
Hmm.
you like the Spike Feeders, please go check out their website. It's actually called thespikefeeders.com. They have all their deck lists on Architect, which is sweet. They series for better know a combo. Their stuff for Spike on a mic. They even have their own merch stuff and just like a bio about them and who they are,
Mhm.
and this really cute like carousel of pictures that you can click
Mhm.
on to move. But I have to ask, the name of the show is What's in the Box. So tell me, Jim, what is in the box? What is your favorite deck?
Ooh, okay. So I have a deck. I've played it a couple times on the show, but I play it a lot off of the show, like when I'm on streams and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
It's called Aether Glitch,
I
and
I knew it.
it's like far and away the most complicated deck I've ever built, like
I
by an order of magnitude.
I never
Um,
understand when
yeah,
you play it, but I know it's sweet.
yeah. It's okay. So just to give you a little bit of a background behind the deck, I used to write articles before I did the Spike Beater stuff. And I wrote a series of 4 articles that were centered around building casual decks that used like more competitive pieces as like consistent engines to do ridiculous things.
Oh, that resonates. I want to interrupt. I do something kind of similar in a deck, and I honestly seen a lot of that with some of the stuff that you've done in like Aether Glitch and so on and so forth. But I have mole. What's it? The guy who cares about salamanders that came out of Commander
Oh
Legends,
yeah,
Gore
I forgot what his
Maldrick.
name is. Gormuldrak, yeah.
It's literally like I'm playing Mana Crypts and
Mhm.
playing Force of Wills and all these just stupid cards that you shouldn't be playing in a deck like this just to kill people with salamanders. And it reminds me a
Yeah,
lot of like I call it like it's a toddler with a rocket launcher, right?
exactly.
It's something
Yeah,
that it's a win condition that's so silly, but I have so much power in the deck, like it has to do something.
yeah. So like that was the whole premise behind this series of articles where I built one deck per article. Where I said, we've got a really, really strong core to the deck, and we're just going to surround it with weird stuff, right? Stuff that's
Right.
like not optimal. Just we'll have some fun with it. So, like as an example, I built an ad nauseum deck,
Mhm.
and the article went through, how do you build around ad nauseum? Well, the idea is you make your average converted mana cost of your deck as low as possible so that you can draw as many cards off ad nauseum as you can. The other alternative is you can gain a whole bunch of life, and then that allows you to draw more cards with ad nauseum as well. So I said, okay, well, what if you were to do both but take it to the extreme? So I used Ikra Shadiki, the partner commander, and Tana the Bloodsower. So I said, let's gain a whole bunch of life with Ikra Shadiki, and then when we cast Ad Nauseum, we'll get our average converted mana cost as low as humanly possible. And the way I did that was by playing 65 lands in the deck. Um, so we're just going to draw a whole mitt full of lands. We'll draw like 60 cards. Most of them will be lands. And then how do you win with lands? Well, you can play Seismic Assault or Land's Edge or whatever and just throw them at people until they're dead. So that's the idea behind this series of decks. There was 65 land ad nauseum. I played a Derevi mill deck that uses Derevi triggers to untap like Keening Stone and stuff like that. There was a Jaleva Gravestorm deck that used like the Gravestorm zombie combos to kill people. There was a Flash Hulk deck, but similarly, the Flash Hulk trigger, instead of getting Cephalid Breakfast, gets all of the 0-drop creatures in the game and Perforos. And so they all come into play at the same time, and it just donks people for like 30. Um, and then the last one, which is Aether Glitch, that's this deck that I'm talking about, was around Aetherflux Reservoir and its interaction with the card Lich's Mastery. So we took, just to give your viewers a little bit of background, Aetherflux Reservoir and Lich's Mastery means that every time you cast a spell, Aetherflux Reservoir triggers, and you would gain some amount of life based on the number of spells you cast. Lich's Mastery says whenever you gain life, draw some cards. So it would allow you to say, uh, cast a spell, gain a life. You gain the life, it draws you a card, and it just keeps drawing you cards as you cast spells. More and more and more and more. So I built a deck around that idea, called it Aether Lich, and it ends up being a deck that's very similar to like Legacy Tin Fins, where you like, um, yeah, it's like
it
ridiculous.
it
But
is.
the
It's
idea is you're using life gain to draw cards. So
I didn't think about it in retrospective tin fins because it like how you want to play it does play like tin
yeah, it's very
fins.
much like Legacy Tin Fins.
I didn't think
Um,
about that at all.
yeah, and again, a little bit of background if you're not familiar with Legacy Tin Fins, it usually uses like Gristlebrand and Children of Corliss.
Hmm.
And then you like pay a whole bunch of life to draw cards with Gristlebrand, gain it all back with Children of Corliss, draw a whole bunch more cards.
I miss
Um,
I miss
yeah,
Gristlebrand and Commander. God, that was a good weekend.
Yeah. And so like with this deck, instead, what you're doing is like you cast Lich, it sets your life total to 0, and then you might crack something like Tainted Sigil, which is like gain life
Hmm.
equal to the amount of life lost by all players this turn. So because you've lost all your life to Lich, Tainted Sigil will gain you like 35 life or whatever, and then Lich turns it into card draw. Or you're using these like really bursty life gain effects like Grey Merchant of Asphodel,
Hmm.
where you're like, okay, it enters the battlefield, you drain everybody for 6 because you've got a Lich in play, which is 4 black pips, Grey Merchant, which is 2. So everybody loses 6 life, and then you draw 18 cards. It's just stuff like that, right? So, and then it's a storm deck, but that's the sort of central idea behind it.
I'm glad that you've explained it because I've literally watched so many episodes where you've played it, and I'm like, God, I love Jim, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do with
Oh,
these
it's
cards.
so complicated. Like the problem behind the deck is that it's got a lot of situations that you run into where you've got multiple replacement effects that are trying
Hmm.
to act on the same event. Which again, for background for the viewers, when you've got multiple replacement effects that try to replace the same event, the controller of the event gets to choose which one applies, and then each one can only apply to the same event once. So that's, but when you end up with things like I'm going to, replace my next card draw with gain 5 life, and then Lich is going to replace that gain 5 life with draw 5 cards through something like Words of Worship. Um, there's just like multiple, I'm not going to
Yeah,
say layers because it's not layers, but multiple replacement effects that all interact at the same time. It's
it's
very
it's
complicated.
seriously it's such a cool deck, but like I said, like I've thought about building a less complicated version of it, but then it just is not the same thing. Like it doesn't feel the
Yeah.
same.
The thing that I love the most about this deck though is that it's very complicated and it's very efficient, but it's not necessarily efficient in a way that maximizes your ability to win the game.
Right.
Um, Lich, there's this really like weird and attractive kind of tension between win the game and lose the game because it plays a ton of cards that just say, if something happens, you lose the game.
Right.
And so I frequently have people ask me, well, what happens if somebody just like, you know, bounces or destroys your Lich effect? Do you just lose the game? And I'm like, yeah, it happens sometimes,
Yeah.
Like that's the trade-off. You do a whole bunch of cool stuff, but you have this like weird Achilles heel where every once in a while you try and do a whole bunch of weird stuff. And it's like that scene in Indiana Jones where the guy's like flourishing with his sword and
And
then
he just
Indiana Jones
gets
pulls out his gun and shoots him. Like that's
I
that's what it feels like playing that deck.
I just for my Phyrexian box, I just built Grevin, Predator
Oh yeah.
Captain, and it's kind
Yeah.
of the same thing. It's like I'm gonna play Wall of Blood, and I'm gonna lose a ton
Yeah.
of life. Well, what if Grevin gets killed?
Yeah.
Then
Then
I'm
you
at
die.
then I'm maybe at
Yeah.
3 life. That's I
Like
think
it happens sometimes.
yeah. I'm a very big proponent of is the table having fun? Are you having fun? Did you lose and did you laugh because you lost? Like
Yeah.
then it's probably a good night. Like whatever.
Like one time, this is like probably my favorite way. This is a total tangent, but my favorite
That
way
was
that I've
fine.
ever lost the game. I was playing my Kangi Airy Keeper Changeling Tribal deck,
Nice.
and a guy took control of my opponent took control of my turn using Worst Fears. And I had an Avian Changeling in play. So on my turn, he's controlling me. He's making all my decisions for me. He makes me attack him with my Avian Changeling. Okay. He declares no blocks. In the post combat main phase, he casts Knowledge Exploitation,
Mhm.
which is for its prowl cost. So if you attacked or if you dealt damage with a rogue this turn, you can cast it for its prowl cost.
Right.
So because Avian Changeling is a rogue, it enabled the prowl cost. He cast it. He searched his own deck. So he says, I want to search like your deck. So from my perspective, it's his deck. He searches up Toxic Deluge, makes me cast it, and pay my entire life total into it. And I'm like, well, I guess I'm dead.
If you're gonna go out, like that's a good way to go
Right.
out,
I mean, like,
honestly.
it was a galaxy brain play, and you can't be mad about it because, like, that again, that's one of those distinctively commander experiences, right?
Exactly. I've had
Like,
some
I love that.
that's what the format I think is really about. We actually did an episode today talking about the new what's I'm so bad with names, goodness. The new Is It Commander from the Commander deck. Oh,
Oh,
what is
good question. I
I
don't really keep up with new sets, so it's kind of hard for me.
I forget her name, but basically we end up making like I end up helping my co-host, and we end up making it more of like a Secret Commander Brutaclad deck, which
Oh yeah,
I love
love
Brutaclad.
Brutaclad.
I do not like Is It, but I love Brutaclad, and it was
Mhm.
one of those things like it's a bunch of big splashy spells because that's kind of what Prismari is about is like doing these big over the top
Yeah.
spells, and I was like, what's so cool about this deck is that it I feel like encompasses the soul of Commander, right? You want to do big splashy things. You want to do just where else are you gonna play really an 8 mana spell? And it
Mhm.
actually means something.
Yeah. Yeah, I call them distinctively commander experiences. In the philosophy document, they call them resonant experiences. It's like
Mhm.
things that are like, yes, that was a good use of my time to play that game?
Yeah. I it's taken me a while to, like, understand that, and I feel like since I've gotten to the point where I now understand it's also my responsibility for the table to have a good time, it's changed how I brew, and I think I'm happier for it,
Yeah.
honestly. It's like because I feel like if I play with a lot less tutors, if I play with tutors at all, I try to hearken on our power level every single time. Like,
Mhm.
what kind of experience are we expecting to have? Like, do I need to play something a little bit more aggressive than this? Am I cool to sit here and dirtle in my graveyard the whole time? Like, is that going to bother you guys? Like, so it's definitely been something that I feel like as you understand your experience is just as important as the other players, your games start to not necessarily become more fun, but it feels more fun. Like if I
Yeah.
lose, but I see someone else's deck go off and we were all on agreement on everything, I'm still excited because my friend just went off with a silly combo. Or
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, right? Like, people talk a lot about how, in a more casual format or a more social format, winning isn't the only thing. But the other thing is, the flip side of that same coin is you also can't get too hung up on losing, right?
mhm,
Like a lot of people I find will say, winning isn't the only thing, but they really don't want to lose, you
Yeah,
know?
like
And they might
don't
get salty if they lose in a way that they don't want to lose. And but
like king
the
making
flip side
type
of it is,
stuff and like
yeah, like
spy
the flip side of
plays.
it is when you lose, like, okay, shuffle up, let's play again. Um, and if you're contributing to a positive atmosphere, that also involves being a gracious loser,
Yep. We just we just played a game and it was just kind of a silly game. One of our hosts stepped away while we were streaming, and I have an Orvar deck, and two of our
Mhm.
other hosts have Orvar decks. I said, guys, go get your Orvar decks. And Brian was playing his Savala, his green white Savala deck. So literally, he came back, and we were all playing Orvar with his one Savala deck, and it was just absolute silliness, like everyone
Yep,
copying everything, him trying to deal with the board state. That's
yep.
okay. I'm just going to target Orvar, make a copy of Orvar. You're,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that was the thing. Like, I didn't win that game, but man,
Mhm.
it was silly and it was fun.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes, like, I'm all about, like, if you want to win, if that's how you want to play, cool. But there's a lot more to it.
Yeah, and so this is, kind of ties back to our purpose as a channel, but I definitely believe that there's a lot of things that you can experience in the Commander format, right?
Hmm.
Like playing a lore-driven game, playing Plane Chase, playing, something that might be a little bit more narrative-driven. That's a totally valid and very different way of playing than something like CDH, where you're just like pedal to the metal, hammer down, cards on the
Hmm.
table, let's see what happens. But there's all these kind of dials that you can turn to vary your experience. Power level is one of those things. Budget is one of those things. Story is one of those things. Um, you can do that in a lot of different ways. So we just like kind of turn some of the dials and see what kind of different things we can experience in the format, with power level being one of them. A lot of people don't turn that dial because they're, satisfied with how, their games are going, and that's fine. But we do like to turn that dial and experience some different things every now and again.
One of our hosts, Dan, he's been playing Magic for a very, very long time. He's one of those guys that just has a collection that's just unrivaled, it feels like. And he's super into playing CDH. And just recently I've been like, I don't know. Like, I love watching it, but I don't know if I could play it. And now I've
Mhm.
gotten to the point where it's like, I want power levels everywhere. I want to be able to sit down and have a
Yeah,
pre-con unedited so I can share this experience, have a CEDH deck that I can set down and share this experience, because I find more and more as I play is like that's what I want. Like, I want people to be able to see my deck and I want to be able to see their deck, and I just want the experience of playing. And I think a lot of
yeah,
people sometimes forget that's, kind of what it's about, is just the gathering.
yep. It's every once in a while, when you run into somebody that's very staunchly opposed to CDH, they'll ask you the question, well, why don't you just go play Vintage? That's a very common question that people will
Hmm.
ask, the people in the CDH community. And like, there's a couple problems with that. Like, the first one is, Vintage is not EDH. It's
Yeah.
not 4 player, 40 life. Like,
Yeah.
there's so many structural differences deliberately about
Hmm.
why Commander is not Vintage. And the second thing is nobody plays Vintage.
Yeah.
So, like, if I walk into a Commander store, the odds that I can find somebody with a CEDH deck are infinitely higher than somebody with a Vintage deck.
And
You know?
you miss out on the social. That's the big thing. Like, I love sitting down and playing with my friends, or just playing and meeting
Mhm.
new people. Before COVID, being able to go to GPs or go to Magic Fest or whatever you want to call them was great. I would literally go there. I wasn't playing in any of the, like, 60 card formats. I would literally take my trade binder and my favorite decks at the time. Hey, you guys want to play Commander? There's a table over here. Yeah, let's do
Yeah.
that. And
Yeah.
that's the fun. That's what I want to
Yeah. And
see.
like, honestly, even though I do skew a little bit more to the competitive side of things, I don't like playing in tournaments. That's not a pleasant experience for me. Like,
Mm-mm.
I don't play other 60 card formats. I don't go to tournaments. It's not an experience that I enjoy. So it's always a little weird. It hits a little weird when somebody's like, "Well, why don't you just go play Vintage?" And
It's
it's
just
like,
not
"Well,
the
I don't
same
really want to play
experience.
Vintage."
It's not the
Yeah.
same experience. Like, I love Magic, but anytime someone hands me a 60 card deck, I feel like I'm Will Ferrell. Like, I don't know what to do with my hands. Like,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
if if my deck isn't like 100 cards, I can't build. Like, I've had so many friends like, oh well, you're good at Commander. Can you help me with my modern deck?
Oh, it's so different. It's
No,
so different.
no, I cannot.
No.
uh, if you want to take that legendary creature out, I can build a Commander deck around that for you.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a different skill set, though.
True. So before we wrap things up, because we kind of went over a little bit over, and I'm sorry, I told you
That's
it would
okay.
be
I don't have
shorter.
anywhere to be.
Okay, well, I mean, we can keep powering through. I'm fine with
Yep.
that. I'm enjoying the conversation. So we talked about your favorite deck, but can you explain like why you like decks like Aether Glitch, and also what types of decks you like to build? Like for me, I love reanimation and strategies. So like,
Mhm.
what kind of strategies and synergies do you like to build around?
That's a really good question. My deck building process, what I've come to learn is actually fairly different. I was just talking to Gavin Verhey about this a couple weeks ago, when the commander precons came out,
Hmm.
because he asked me like what kind of commanders do you like building around? And I said, well, I don't really look at it that way. I don't like, and this is one of the reasons why I don't really get inspired much by new set releases, is because people will look at the commanders and they'll say, oh, I want to build Brina, or I want to build, whoever. That doesn't really appeal to me. That's not the way that I kind of look at things. I generally find a card interaction that I really like, and I talked about a few of those, like ad nauseum, or
Right.
ad nauseum with lands, Aether Lich with, or Aetherflux Reservoir with Lich's Mastery, Derevi with Keening Stone. I'll find these like usually a two-card interaction, maybe a three-card interaction, or just an idea of something that I want to happen in a game.
Hmm.
Like, I think it would be really cool if this happened. And then I'll build my deck around making that happen. You know, sometimes that involves a commander and sometimes it doesn't. Um, but like, I really like the idea of, I've got an Annex and Siamede deck, and it's based around heroic. And I really like the idea of being able to cast spells that target Annex and Siamede and make my team bigger, right?
Sure.
So in that situation, it's a situation where it's very commander driven. But I also have a lot of decks like my Flash Hulk deck, where it's like, I really like the idea of Protean Hulk being able to get like 30 creatures or 20 creatures, because they all cost zero. Let's
Sure.
do something around that. So a lot of the time, I'll come up with that sort of nugget first, and I'll say, okay, well, what kind of cards do I need to make that interaction happen? And I'll make a rough list of cards. um, I might do a little bit of kind of exploratory scryfall searches based around specific templating of those cards.
Right.
So if
Right.
I say I'm looking for an effect that's like this, I'll take that card, rip a couple words out of its text box, and search for those words and see what other cards are similar. And then once I've got a rough list of cards that I need to include to make it happen, that'll give me kind of a roadmap of what color identities are reasonable. And then once I've got an idea of what color identities are reasonable, then I can look from the list of available commanders and see which commander might be a good fit for that deck. Um, so it's a very like, I call it a bottom up approach. I don't know if that's an appropriate use of that term, but
I get what you're saying. Typically, I do something similar. It's like, well, how can I play out of the graveyard in this color?
yeah,
That's me. Like,
exactly. And you're like,
um,
well, what do you want to play out of the graveyard? And then you come up with like a list of creatures you want, and then you're like, okay, well, what colors do I need in my deck to play those creatures? And then we've got a
exactly.
commander, and then we run from there.
I just found Urtai the Corrupted, for example.
Yep.
It's not a very, when you look at it, most people will build more stacksy and more enchantment
Hmm.
based, and I saw it as like, wow, this is a very good sack outlet, right? Like
Yep.
being able to pay blue, tap it, sack a creature or enchantment, and counter a spell, that's immensely powerful.
Yep.
So I'm just gonna sacrifice creatures to,
Yeah.
Urtai to then rebuy them, or just have this cool reanimator show. We're already in Esper, so we have black being the first color that cares about reanimation, and white being secondary. So
Hmm.
I'm just gonna go for it and then copy things. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can definitely like I can resonate with you on that. Like where it's sometimes it is the commander, sometimes it's just like these two cards interact in such a way that I want to try to abuse this.
Yeah. So it's very like, it's less frequent that I'll find a specific commander that I want to build, and more frequent like the Modern Horizon previews just came
Hmm.
out this week, and like, I don't know if there were any legendary creatures. I don't particularly care, but
Not that I've seen.
um, something like Urza's Saga, this land, that's the kind of thing that's just like, what can I do with Urza's Saga? This is a cool card. It's weird,
And it's
and
such
like,
a I
yeah,
was super like what it does is powerful, sure, but what was so enticing to me, because I had similar thoughts, was that it was an enchantment land.
yeah. It's
I
just
don't
weird, right? I want
Yeah,
to play this land because it's weird and it's different,
I don't know what I want to do with it, and I don't necessarily believe that it's going to be powerful. but I want to do something with this.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that'll, like, get my creative juices flowing, that type of card. Or, like, I point to the Ozolith as another one where it's just like, I wanna play with the Ozolith. I don't care what I'm doing with it, it's just a cool card. And then I'm like,
It's
you know what? It might result in me building a Skullbriar deck or, like, something, you
I
know?
love the Ozolith because it's in such a unique design space too, because it's not just
Mhm.
it's counters.
Yeah.
It
Yep.
doesn't specify. So I'm a very big I love mutate. I'm so sad that we don't have more mutate creatures because I would
Mm.
build so much more mutate. But what was cool about Ikoria outside of mutate was the keyword tokens. So I have
Mhm.
a whole mimeoplasm deck built around mutate and keyword tokens.
That's
So
cool.
yeah, so like you would normally mutate, you'd see like in Sultai especially, you'd see like Borkoros or Otrimi. So to have the mimeoplasm, I literally just how complicated can I make this on
Yeah.
myself to explain what's going on my board state, and the
Yeah.
Ozilif just helps
Yeah.
that.
That's very similar. Like, I'll see a card like that come out, and then that's what gets the wheels moving, and then that sometimes will result in a deck and sometimes not. Sometimes I'll just, like, make a note in my notebook of, like, "This is a cool interaction," and then I
Oh
might leave it and come back to it a couple years later once there's more support.
yeah, I'm so bad about that. I will literally screenshot things on my phone and then I'll like write little notes about it, or I'll come home and I'll go through all my collection, have this large pile sitting next to me, like, okay, these are all my ideas for this weird interaction or theme or what have you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, awesome. So I think I think that wraps it up for this first episode. Jim, thank you so much for being on. It was an absolute pleasure to talk with you. For anyone who might not know, would you care to like just plug yourself a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. You can find our content, like we talked about, on YouTube or Twitch at the Spike Feeders. That's just like the card name, but with an S at the end. You can also reach us on Twitter, Facebook, like all of those things. We're all the Spike Feeders on all of those. Or
Mhm.
if you want to get in touch with me specifically, you can reach me at JimTSF on Twitter. Or you can join our Discord, the Spike Colony. And those are the best ways to get a hold of me. Zach, you reach me by email at thespikefeeders@gmail.com. That's also a good way to get a hold of me, but it goes to the entire group of the seven of us.
Yeah, I was very surprised. Very punctual. I was sitting at work and I literally I work on medical parts and I was just like, I'm just going to reach out to Jim. I'm just going to see if it'll happen.
Oh,
And I literally almost destroyed a part because I saw the reply back so quickly. I was like, holy crap. Uh
yeah, you caught me at a great time. It was like early yesterday morning,
mhm.
and I just got my COVID vaccine on Thursday morning, and Friday morning I woke up and I was so sore. I was sitting in the dark in my living room, just doing nothing.
Oh, buddy, I'm
It
so
was
sorry to
like
hear that.
I woke up at like 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'm just sitting in the dark in my living room, and I'm like, "Oh, I got an email," and so I just responded,
Well, is
and
this your
yeah,
first or
you just
second?
caught me at the right time. I was the first one. Yeah, I
Oh,
got the Moderna.
nice. I went with Pfizer, so um,
Yeah.
welcome to almost the club.
I know. I can't wait for the second one. But
Yeah.
you just happened to catch me at, like, the perfect time. I was sitting doing absolutely nothing in my living room when you emailed me.
Well, I'm super glad the stars aligned and I had a spike on the mic for this episode.
It was fun. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Oh man, I believe me, all the thanks are on this side. It was such a pleasure. Once again, if for some reason you have not been enticed by this tall drink of water, please go find all of his content everywhere and the other spike feeders who are also amazing people. Um, I've been Necrozach, and this has been What's in the Box.